All right, let's look at CRWV. See what the situation is there. Not on my list. Interesting. There it is. $77 stock. We're going to try to look at the debt. Oh, wow. Okay. Right. So we've got 2029 paper. That's 270. 2030 paper, 2 billion. 2031 paper for 1750. They have a term loan, two term loans. But I don't know what their terms are. So let's look at the 2029s first. This matures November 2029. 5.7% coupon here. Don't have a price on the bond. We have 2030s that are 9.25 coupon. Those are trading at 95 cents. So still pretty solvent there. 9.5, 9.25. Those are 6/130. They're callable. And let's see. And we got 2031s. These mature Feb 1st. They're 9% paper. And they are trading for 93 cents. 93 cents a little ugly. That is a little worrisome. So we're just going to look at some other things. 1 second. Try to place some other trades here too. I'm not trading SAP, no. Yeah, Biohaven, you know, the CEO and other people on the board, looks like they've took down a bunch of the stock in the secondary. The worst is over for those guys. But we'll see. Yeah. Tell me about it, Dev Trader. Novus is such a fake company. If their market cap was any bigger, I would short it, but it's a like 80 mil market cap, so nothing to short. And SanDisk up 10%. Remarkable. Micron up 5%. Storage is in vogue. I don't know much about Pally, to be honest. Oh, this market's wild. You know, you've got $2 moves in stocks that are just back and forth. All right, let's see if CoreWeave can cover their obligations. That's the big key here. We're going to look at the 2029 paper, which is it's a very small amount. It's only 270 million. So that's almost certainly going to be fine. But then the 2030 paper and the 2031 paper is pretty tricky. You've got 3 billion there. But on cash flow from operations, they delivered 1.7 that quarter. So, you know, it would seem that, you know, 3.7 should be doable. But the big but here, the Kim Kardashian here is morning is really like, what does the data center look like, you know, years from now? Now, at the same time, like some of these contracts are pretty much guaranteed contracts, right? But you know, we just have to think about kind of EQ is this little tiny piece of crap that, you know, is kind of like a mini Abivax, but I don't really know much about it. I just bought a tiny amount just because the guy who found Abivax bought it too, so it's really not that important to me. It's some penny stock. Okay, so we just sort of have to think about what does cash flow look like for these guys next quarter, and depreciation here. There's something funky here. Let's look at the cash flow statement. So CoreWeave took in a bunch of cash for deferred revenue, which if you strip that out, they actually weren't, they haven't been that profitable this year so far. It's kind of scary. It's a really tricky thing to model. Kind of an accounting nightmare, to be honest, but we should go through it just because it's a good exercise. For anyone trying to study financial statements, I would definitely try to model CoreWeave. You don't have that much information because it's kind of a new publicly traded company. But like, if you really want a good workout, sometimes you want to go to the gym and work out and get stronger. This is the same thing here. Try to go through CoreWeave and see if you can lift these weights. It's usually pretty easy for tech companies and for software companies at least, and for biotech. But you want a real accounting challenge, it's not even that big of a challenge, but it kind of is a challenge with respect to just modeling the future vis-a-vis the debt and trying to see if the debt is solvent or not, or the company is solvent or not. Who's telling you this stuff? What stream is going through this? Nobody. They don't know how. They never worked on Wall Street. Why are you watching these people? Why? Why would you do that? It's so stupid. It's sad. Sad. Meanwhile, I can't get these numbers to add up, but 1152, 883, 560, 1933, 698, 299, 299. What is that one? That is current. Okay, add the restricted cash up here. 4527. There we go. Do I have any books about accounting? We go to college. I think Ben Graham wrote a book about financial statements. Can't be sure. I'm not Mr. Forensic Accounting either, by the way. But I know enough to do this. So just, first things first, you build up all the statements, which, again, I've sort of avoided because CoreWeave has this like, they weren't public. So it's hard to add everything up. Okay. CPA. Yeah, you don't need to be CPA. That CPA is like, you learn audit and controls and stuff like that. That's good if you want to be a CFO, but maybe not so good if you want to do financial statement analysis. Let's see if they filed. I think they have one more 10Q, thank God. Otherwise, we'd have to guess from S3s and shit like that. But yeah, the solvency risk of CoreWeave is what we're trying to figure out here. And, you know, one key question is like, can their customers kill their contracts, you know, overnight? Is there any way they can get out of them? Now, we don't have their contracts, I don't think. So we're just going to have to read financial statements and see, is there some out? Who wants to buy some CDS? All right, we can do a full cash flow statement for the first quarter. Okay, minus 34641. And what we're really trying to focus on here is the depreciation. That's kind of the key question in my eyes. And then also working capital. I think working capital is pretty atrocious for them. And I'm actually going to do something I don't usually do, which is actually spell out all the working capital items instead of consolidating them. Yeah, I think most of this is going to hinge on whether or not their customers can, you know, have any option at all to cancel. That's kind of where it all boils down. So yeah, we know they generated 61 million in cash flow from operations. They bought 1.5 billion of chips, nevertheless. It's always good. How much money do we make this quarter? 61 million? Okay, yeah, I want to buy 1.4 billion of chips. What? Okay. Yeah. That sounds smart. You just don't see the vision. Use a hater. There's no FX here. No, I'm still short quantum. Very painful today. And Friday was very painful. Why is QUBT up? It's so crazy. Look at AVXL is up too. Unbelievable. There's too much money sloshing around in this market. Yeah, I was supposed to bring my hoodie, but I forgot it at home. So now I'm going to be freezing all day. Oh, maybe I have an app for that. I have to go get my passport. When will you surpass Warren Buffett? That's a tough act to follow. For news, I would use Godel. That or Bloomberg. Ah, there it is. Okay, that's easy. Ha. Yeah, market's just gyrating like crazy. These are so weird. Contract incentive? Operating lease, right of use assets acquired through lease liability. I want to throw that in other. Warrants received as lease incentive. Non-cash investments. Non-cash investments. The fuck is a non-cash investment? Reclassification of customer deposit to debt? Bruh. Reclassification of warrants to equity. This is so weird. I don't even know how to do this. Okay. This is a complicated statement. There's all these extra lines here. I would say less than that, Leonard. Okay, now the most recent one. Okay. Still don't have this quite right, but almost there. Let's see. 1402. This is a plus, right? 333, 211. Negative 171,034. 1252507. This is 14. 233. 836. Okay. Perfect. Look at the CapEx. So nuts. What the fuck? Some underflow error? What the hell is that? $28,693. Proceeds from stock options. IPO proceeds 1422. 619 67669. Okay. There. Use 144. IPO 28769. 5779. Okay, great. Now that's all set up. We can start sort of analyzing this. We don't need these lines anymore necessarily. I'll just remove them from this. Okay. Let's focus. So they had this big cash flow quarter in Q3, but where's the cash flow coming from? That's what we're trying to figure out. You got 630 from DNA, which is fine. We like DNA. We like to add that back, right? No problem. But what about these two? Accounts payable is just money that you don't pay your vendors, right? So I think that's, if you're growing, this would apply. Deferred revenue is money you receive from your customers, but you still owe them the product. So deferred revenue is kind of a tricky one to book. So we're trying to figure out what the true margin on the business is. And we could do that with the income statement, right? Deferred revenue is not good if you're counting it in cash flow because it's not really cash flow. You want deferred revenue, but that's in backlog as well. So if we try to just do net income plus D&A, oh, sorry. We do net income plus D&A, we get cash flow that's a lot more modest, 150, 300, 400, and I think this is probably the right way to do it. Maybe with SBC, try that. Because stock-based comp is obviously not cash as well. So give them credit for that too. If I'm a lender, I'm okay with that. So, that's a little bit better. That's 330, 450, 500. Here's gross margin with depreciation added back is more like 60%, which is pretty good. I don't know if... Yeah, I think we stick with the income statement. I don't know what the next quarters will bring too. That's a really important question. But I took this number, the 64%, the margin there. I should increase the sales and marketing. So it's obviously going up. I should increase the G&A too, because I do think that'll go up. Okay, but still very healthy. That's going to be a very healthy business if they can grow it. And that's the question, right? Is this backlog really uncancelable? So if we just take consensus, which is, I think, kind of what I did here. Actually, I'm below consensus. Yeah. Maybe not totally below consensus, but okay. Yeah, if we take below consensus... Yeah, just the next 5 quarters wipes out all their debt. So at least all the bonds. I want to look into this. Let's see if we can find the term loan here. Okay. DDTL 1.0 facility. Okay. Well, we have some of this stuff here. We have these two outstanding. Okay, let's try this. 2030 senior notes. DDTL 1.0, DDTL 2.0, DDTL 2.1, DDTL 3.0. What are these? These are term loan facilities. They've got a revolver. $700. 3.0 is 2030 paper. Two point one is September 2030 paper. And the enchilada, the big one, is 2.0, which is, again, 2030 maturity, 10% interest. And then 1.0 is a pretty big piece of paper. That's March 2028, so pretty soon. But they don't have any debt due for a little while. But here's the debt schedule. So we'll finish out this quarter. We'll just assume that their cash flow is this rough net income plus D&A that I'm projecting here. I assume they don't do any more CapEx purchases, which obviously they do intend to do that. Okay. Okay, let's see. So 3.5 in cash. This is 12,755 in debt. They still have other loans. They have Magnetar. That looks like the Magnetar loan there, 12%. January 2029, 265 million. Then they have OEM financing arrangements. Okay, that's NVIDIA? Or who is that? And that's due right away. That's odd. We'll have to look into that a little bit. All right, so that's the stack. $14.2 billion of debt. 3.4 billion of cash. So now let's go to the annuals. We'll see how they're going to handle this. They won't pay taxes while they have this debt outstanding. It gets swept into the debt. Hi. Okay, so if all goes according to plan, it looks like they have plenty of cash flow to handle not just paying the debt, but also expanding the business. 2026 cash flow could be as much as 5 billion, in which case they don't pay this, they don't pay this, they don't pay this, or this, but perhaps they pay this. And cash would drop to say 7 billion. Aggregate debt they'd still be in a net debt position, but in 2027, let's see what they pay. I don't think they'd pay anything, but they'd now be in a net cash position. In 2028, if things went according to plan, they'd be fine to pay off virtually all of this, right? 2028, what would be mature is this and this. So yeah, they would not just be solvent, they'd be flush with cash. What's the catch? What's the catch? The catch maybe is you have a $51 billion, $55 billion backlog, and we're recognizing, 51 over the next period here. Yeah, no, we're going to do that as well, Xantev. Don't worry. I'm about to pop that into. Well, do they need to buy more GPUs if this is contracted already? Are they getting contracts for GPUs they don't own yet? I don't think so. Gross margin is that's excluding DNA. So that's the runoff gross margin. It's a very profitable business once you've bought the chips and you don't have to pay for them anymore. It's a lot of profits there. Okay, yeah, I'm substantially below the street, right? The street's at 30 billion here. And the street's at 18 billion here, 18 and a half. So I'm very much, much, lower. Adjusted net income is a little bit different because the street is assuming they. See if I can get cash flows. Street's assuming some cash flow per share. Let's see. This is sort of cash flow per share right here. And I'm again more or less below the street here. Let me see. Street's at 1778 for this year, 3333 for that year. This is operating cash flow. And 2026, slightly above the street, but that's that. So let's assume they keep spending, which I think is a fair assumption. Go back to CapEx here. This number kind of tells you how much they can afford to spend on CapEx, the change over change, and keep a no debt profile. Not that much, actually. It's kind of a weird business, right? Because, like, you keep spending CapEx to. You never. Where are you ever accumulating cash? Which is kind of the point of business and capitalism. Recurring CapEx is the catch, yeah. No, Anthony just helps us out on some binaries. He's not an employee here or anything. I wish he was. In fact, if they just kind of, I don't know, if they just assume, because like you would think the CapEx is going to have to go up if they want to keep sort of servicing marquee clients, but let's assume it stays flat, which I don't think would be good. You know, you'd have $6 billion in cash at the end of 2028, net cash. So at the end of 2028, your EV would be 32 billion at this share price. What's your true, if I change this back to a 20, what's normal margins? 24%. Debt's retired. You start paying taxes. Say 3 billion. So you're trading it, say, 10 times. Ten times 2028. Gotta stay away from this fucking company, man. What a quagmire. Don't forget the PP&E is an asset too. Even though it's depreciating, you know, owning chips is worth something. You got to look at the one question is looking at the covenants in the contracts. Can customers cancel? Will margins drop on new contracts? We don't know what the margin profile of new contracts is. It could be much lower. So consider that. Yeah, we just don't know what the margin profile is. So many unknowns, and when you have debt, it's pretty unforgiving. But it doesn't look like they're going to have a solvency problem. You know, my hope is that I could find some solvency problem and then just short the stock and not have to worry about it. But it's more work now, you know, looking into contracts, looking into margin profile, the new contracts. You're not going to know until, you know, until those contracts start rolling on. But, you know, so far they've been doing fine.